Good evening. It's good to be back. It's really good to be back in my own bed. That's really nice. The trip was fantastic. Everything went good. We had a great visit. The congregation there at Ashdown treated us very well. Had a very good visit. Very good. A couple of classes with them. Really good. But thankful to be back. Tonight we pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 24. We've been working through the history of Samuel. David is on the run from Saul. Saul is a fanatical spear thrower, not very good at what he does, but he loves to throw that thing. He's missed David a couple times. He's missed his son Jonathan once, but it doesn't keep him from trying. He's pursuing David all around the wilderness of Ziph. And tonight we get a little bit more of the same. But we have something rather unique involved in this chapter as Saul gets very close to David. We got the map. I do want us to keep in mind where these things are taking place. This is the same map. The area has not changed. The cities are the same. I brought my laser and I left it out there in the Yukon. Good night. At least I have it on the premises, right? You see En-Gedi off to the side over at the Dead Sea. That's what you're looking at, the blue splotch there. The oasis of En-Gedi. This is where most of our chapter today is going to be. However, David has been around and in just to the east of En-Gedi in the wilderness of Ziph. We talked about how the wilderness is not wilderness as we think of wilderness, not forest full of trees and vines and honeysuckle, but rocks, gravel, and heat is mostly what we're talking about here. And we're going to see a few images of that in just a moment. So we get into the chapter 24 here, and we'll read the first few verses to kind of get us started. Saul returned from following the Philistines. He was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." And then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the Wild Goats Rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave. And Saul went in to relieve himself. And now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. All right, the situation is this, right? We got Saul, his army, at least, I would say 3,000. Got David and his men. Last count we had was somewhere around 600. But David and some, at least, are hiding in the cave. Saul has went into this cave to use a restroom. He wanted some privacy. He goes into the cave, and we have a scene set. Now, if you're looking at these images here, these are some of our wanderings there in Israel, walking. Our tour guide was not afraid to take our bus off-roading. So we went and drove sometimes where there were no roads, and he had us out walking. This is a stronghold. We talked in chapter 23, maybe even 22, about some of the strongholds that David hid out in. Some of these that we're looking at here, you see the stacked stones on top of the hill there. A lot of those things are several thousand years old. They were places set up to hide. You can see that it would not be easy to get up there, even if you were to decide to attack. You would not be very successful. And from these strongholds, they could typically signal on down through the mountains to one another, as be a way of warning others as well. Here's a few more that you can see. There is on top of that hill a stronghold built as well. There's caves, plenty of places to hide oneself out here in what we would call the Judean wilderness or desert. Some of these, like this one, is actually visible from the highway as you're driving by. We got out, kind of went down and looked around at it a bit as well. But these caves, these strongholds, all good places for someone to successfully hide from the law if they're pursuing you, right? Here is, this one is way back in there. We drove a long ways down a creek bed, and then we got out and walked a long ways down a creek bed. And it's hard to judge depth and altitude from a photo, a 2D image. You'll just have to take my word for it when I say it's very steep right there. You can see closer up there, there's a couple black dots. Those are caves, and they're pretty good sized caves. And while we were there, you could see some of those little rock rat critters running around in and out of those caves and such. But you can see just kind of what this terrain is we're talking about with David and Saul and this pursuit that's going on, the kind of terrain David's hiding out in, running from Saul in. It's dry, it's hot, it is rocky, it is not what you would call hospitable, a good place to hide, so long as you can find yourself some water. I'm quite certain there was plenty of ibex and those rock rats running. I don't know what those were. Did y'all get the name of the rat thingies? I did not. I don't know what those things are. I got some pictures of them in a moment too, so we'll see the rock things. Now these pictures, this is going to start up with some that Travis sent me from the oasis of En-Gedi, where the spring actually is. And that cave, I presume, is the cave at En-Gedi, the one that we think that David hid out in.
There's actually about 6 of them.
Okay.
But they're all within a
Stone's throw.
yards of each other.
Okay, so we're right there at it. That is possibly, it is a cave. It may be the cave. That one looks pretty difficult to get to climb up to if you wanted to go to the bathroom. I don't know if I'd choose that one or not, but you're looking at some greenery. It's out of place amongst all the desert. It's not, it's not something you would expect except for the stream that flows right there. It's a little bit closer up to that cave, the tops of those trees. There is the spring itself, right? We didn't get to see that. I'm relying on Travis and Edna tonight. This is the spring. You can see the water at the bottom. The green is most definitely out of place, right? You can see the pretty waterfall it makes and all that. It's David's water source. What he's going to need, he and his men, again, somewhere around 600. You got to have fresh water, and it'd be nice if you could get a bath every now and then, right, or shower, as it were. And so we get a look at it again, caves, and we might even call this a cleft of the rock at this point, but rough terrain. That's what we're looking at. This is rugged country. And that is one of those rock rats. I don't know exactly what you do with that. Given the opportunity and the right set of skills and a little bit of hunger, that right there is what's for dinner, right? If you're really lucky, maybe there's one on the roof. This shed at that one time had around 17 of those things hanging out around it, and it must have been a nest, because as I approached them to get a good close-up picture, they started growling at me, making some kind of noise as if they were trying to warn me not to come any closer. And these are ibex, right? Now I wasn't able to get as close as this to any of them. We did spook some up around the Sea of Galilee. We were walking up near Bernice's palace, lookout, and jumped a few out of some brush. But that's pretty neat. So this is what we're looking at. Given the opportunity, I'm sure David and his men would have dined quite well on ibex. And that's what we're talking about, the wild goats rock, wild goats gate. We see that in the text. And this I threw in just for giggles, because right here by the Dead Sea, in a very well irrigated area, was a date orchard. And so that's what you're looking at, is a date palm with clusters of dates hanging off of them. And if you were fortunate and you had good friends that bought dates, you'd get to eat a few of them without having to buy a whole bunch of them yourself. And that was kind of the case with me. I didn't think I liked dates until I tried those dates, and they're really good. So there's your date palm. These were growing right there by the Dead Sea as well. Okay, I told you last time that there was a pretty awesome overlook. It was called the Flower Blossom or Flower Button of Israel. Did you guys go to this down there around the desert? They drove through the desert. We hiked about 3/4 of a mile to get here.
Yeah, we had to take a hike to get up there.
Okay, is that the right name? Flower Blossom, Flower Button? I couldn't. One of my buddies and I, we were talking about it earlier today, and we could not remember the exact name of it, something like that. The rock is different than the rest of them around. It's white. You see, even to the right of the screen over there. It's white and it fades off into brown, matches the rest of it. Something about that particular mineral deposit is different than everything else. This is a panoramic view, so we're looking about 180 degrees right here. You know, when you take your phone and try to get the whole thing in there. The Dead Sea is partitioned off so much, those weirs going across it, they harvest for potash and all kinds of other minerals to the extent that there's not a whole lot of Dead Sea left, not like there used to be. So it's very industrial through here. Let's see, I've got more. This view is from that same spot, but looking north. You can kind of see the Dead Sea to the right, top right corner up there. This would be looking towards En-Gedi, and we're not very far. I mean, we're not talking about a huge distance between En-Gedi and where I'm standing at here, but I threw this picture in there because I thought it gave a good overview of just how rugged the terrain is. Traveling is not what you'd call easy, and the environment not hospitable. Good place for thieves, robbers, bandits to hide out, not be pursued. So you can kind of see why David would choose an area like this to stay away from King Saul. That is the flower button or blossom or whatever the name of that is. That is about a 22-year-old Harding graduate who wanted to get a very good picture. And as you can see, no guardrails, no handrails, anything like that. One more step or two and he'd have fell about a quarter mile straight down off the side of that thing. But he undoubtedly got some good photos. In the background behind Kyle right there is Mount Pisgah would be back there. Would be one of the mountains that God brought Moses up on to show him the promised land before he died, and the children of Israel crossed on over into the land flowing with milk and honey. So what you're looking there on the far bank, there would be the kingdom of Jordan in the background. Okay, so those, I believe that gets our photographic journey. You got an image in your mind now about the kind of terrain David is hiding out in and his men, where Saul is pursuing. And let's pick back up. Saul is in the cave. David and his men are hiding out. Saul does not know he's in there. That's where we're at in the account so far. So starting in verse 4, the men of David said to him, I'm sure this is a low whisper at this point, "Here's the day which the Lord said to you." You have to be pretty quiet or Saul's going to hear you over there, right? "Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." And then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." There's at least two things that really jump out at me. You read the text and things are just slap you across the face as being, wow. One, that David is able to sneak up on Saul, right? To get that close. Undoubtedly, he had to cover a little distance, or him and a soldier wouldn't have been able to whisper back and forth without Saul hearing it, right? Just logistically speaking, sneaking across gravel, and maybe it was just all hard stone. Maybe there was no loose rocks in there whatsoever. I walk down the driveway occasionally to bring trash cans back and forth the road. I make more noise in the wee hours of the morning than I think a bull would make in a china cabinet just walking across gravel. David sneaks up on Saul in such a way as to cut off a piece of his robe without him knowing it. Knife must have been pretty sharp, no tearing noises or anything like that. It's pretty amazing situation. However, that's insignificant compared to David's mindset. He has an opportunity to bring this whole ordeal to a close, right? If he takes Saul's life, it's over, right? David's already been anointed king. Samuel's anointed him. He takes Saul's life. He goes to Gibeah perhaps and gets with Jonathan, and David is now reigning king, right? Is that how it would work? Y'all help me out. Sounds like it should be that easy, doesn't it? Let's think about a couple of dynamics at play. All right? First, Saul is the anointed king of Israel. So what does that mean? That means God himself chose Saul. He did so through Samuel, right? Samuel anointed him, and Saul was the chosen king. What is that going to look like to Israel if David takes the life of the anointed king? Would David actually have a very successful kingship, or would Israel revolt against him? Then there's another layer to it. You just took that one away for a moment. Because Saul is anointed by God to be king, he is perceived to have God's power on his side, his protection. If God allows Saul to be killed like such, it doesn't reflect well on God. Think about the scenario where God has rescued Israel from Egypt. He's bringing them through the wilderness, and they start building a golden calf. And God in his wrath is going to annihilate Israel and raise up another people from the seed of Moses. And Moses pleads with God and argues, what would Egypt think for you to just bring your people out of Egypt to slaughter them in the wilderness? It just wasn't look good. It doesn't bode well for God. God anointed Saul to be king, chose Saul. You going to turn around and kill him as well? David recognizes in his honor. Now remember, the first thing we know about David, the first thing we see with him is his confrontation with Goliath, but the words that he speaks in the presence of the soldiers, in the presence of Saul, is his faith in God, paraphrasing, how dare this uncircumcised Philistine, how dare him to stand before and taunt the armies of who? The living God. David's faith is in God. And so with that comes honor. It comes a certain respect, right? And to do this thing, to take the life of the Lord's anointed king, is not for him to do. David shows great restraint. He shows great honor. He could have just done like many would and say, I'm doing the work of the Lord here. He needs to go. I am the anointed king. I will be the king. I'll just go ahead and do this. We'll speed this up for God and go ahead and make this happen. But that's not the logic David used, was it? David did the honorable thing. He stayed his hand and then felt bad about it for having cut off the corner of the robe. How could I do this thing? Forbid that I should do this thing, to put out my hand against him. Okay. Skip a few verses, get to verse 10. Saul is finished up. He's left the cave. There's some distance between them now. David comes out of the cave holding the piece of robe and then begins to proclaim so that Saul can hear him and know that it's him. Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. Just notice David's wording. He's showing Saul great honor here, calling him my father, my Lord, lowercase, Lord. Showing Saul great honor, right? And making a point. I had the opportunity and I chose not to. He chose to show honor, right? And that's what David's focus is on. Make this point. One, David's honor. Two, you have no reason to be pursuing me. There's no wrong or treason in my hands. I've not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. That's pretty strong, isn't it? That's pretty strong for David to say, the Lord may do whatever he wants. He'll judge between me and you, and the Lord avenge me against you. But I'm not going to be the one that does the avenging. That's powerful self-control and powerful faith, relying on God to handle the situation. Verse 13, as the proverb of the ancients say, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. So David has accomplished a couple things here in this proclamation, right? I have acted honorably. I have done nothing to deserve your pursuing me. I've done nothing to deserve the death sentence that you've pronounced on me. And yet here you are. Verse 15, may the Lord, Yahweh, capital L-O-R-D, may Yahweh therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. Saul has relented a couple times now, once before David, once before Jonathan, where he's changed his mind about pursuing David. So now here in verse 16, we hear something similar. We begin to hear it. As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, is this your voice, my son David? Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. David's made his point, hasn't he? Notice Saul's language. David has called him Lord, he's called him Father, and Saul here uses the language in return, my son David. Remember, David has, Saul has given David his daughter, Michal. So son fits, son-in-law, but I think it's intended to mean more than that. Saul lifted up his voice and wept, said to David, you're more righteous than I. It's kind of the same thing that Samuel told Saul as well. The kingdom will be torn away from you and given to one better than you. And Saul is beginning to acknowledge, beginning to realize what's happening, right? Verse 18, you have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, would he let him go safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now, behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. And so this is an acknowledgement of what we already know, what Jonathan has already stated. Jonathan in the last chapter is he made a new covenant, a recovenant with David. Here we have Saul acknowledging verbally this thing is going to happen. It's going to happen whether he wants it to or not, really. And David has shown him such great honor and mercy that Saul really has not much of a choice but to acknowledge the situation as it is, right? So verse 20 and 21, and now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house. Now, Jonathan has already made a similar covenant. I talked about that a moment ago, but in the last chapter, there was a covenant that there would be a safe haven for Jonathan's offspring, which by default is also Saul's offspring. What is the first thing that a king, especially one, usurper is not the right word because David's not a usurper, but he's going to be a king that does not come from kingly heritage. He's not coming from the lineage of Saul. The first thing that happens, and we would see it, or you see it in 1st and 2nd Kings, especially in the divided monarchy, when a king takes the throne, the first thing he does to the family of the king is what? They're done for. They're over. His sons, his daughters, their donkeys, their goats, their rabbits, their chickens, and everything else is dealt with. And that's exactly what would happen. So Saul asking for this covenant, asking for this kindness is right on par. You know, he wants to not be blotted out of the history books. He wants his family to be able to persist in Israel. The request is not a vain request. For whatever reason, I did not get verse 22 in my slideshow, but here's verse 22. David swore this to Saul. Saul went home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. They stayed put. Saul went back to Gibeah. And so David is accepting. David is going to allow Saul's family to live. So that is chapter 24. The interesting part, David's honor, right? He had the opportunity to take Saul's life. Saul has tried to take his multiple times now. But David shows restraint. We'll get into chapter 25 next time. David's going to be on the run again. That's sort of the cycle that we go through up until Saul's death. But David's going to be on the run. Going to try his hand with the Philistines again. Quite interesting. I hope that you'll read ahead. Do you have any thoughts or questions about this chapter that you want to go back and talk about for a moment? Right. No, that's true. There's also another interesting thing about the tunic as well, the royal one, that is, because they were made to be unique. There wasn't another one. There wasn't another royal robe out there, and everything about it was unique, even the stitching that is used to make the garment. And so, interesting enough, there are some old clay tablets that have been found in the Mari text where the tunic is actually used to identify royalty. They would take the hem of the tunic and press it in clay, and it would reveal the stitching and also be a source of authority for the text, used kind of like a seal on the text. Very interesting, but the significance of the tunic for Saul here, and I didn't get into it, it's interesting, but not all that significant to the text, but the fact that David is the next anointed king, already been anointed by Samuel, to remove that part of Saul's tunic is symbolic of David taking the authority from Saul. Pretty interesting. I forgot about that until you mentioned the significance of the tunic. But yeah, pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. Any other thoughts about the chapter?
Well, this last few words that David and Saul have, you gather from it that everything was
It wasn't over yet. They're going to run again. David's going to have an opportunity to kill Saul again. He's going to take Saul's spear. Yeah. I mean, Saul has a short memory. In the text, you would think Saul has no memory. It is like he says one thing, and an hour later, he's forgot what he's done. It's kind of how it comes across. Certainly not a man of his word.